The billionaire CEO laughed. If she plays piano, I'll marry her. But when the 22-year-old waitress touched the keys, the entire restaurant froze in disbelief. The crystal chandeliers of the exclusive Serafina restaurant cast a golden glow across the room, but for Julian Vance, the world was a dull shade of gray. At 34 years old, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name was a synonym for ruthless success in the world of private equity. He sat at the best table, a bottle of wine that cost more than a small car breathing beside him, and he was utterly, profoundly bored. Across from him, Tiffany Devereaux, a socialite whose primary skill was appearing in gossip columns, prattled on about a recent yacht party in Monaco. Julian nodded at what he hoped were the right moments, his mind replaying stock tickers and acquisition strategies. His life was a series of victories, a mountain of accomplishments, but he felt nothing. Ever since Clara, his late wife, had passed away 2 years ago, the color had drained from his world, leaving only the cold, hard lines of business. "Julian, darling, are you even listening?" Tiffany pouted, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Of course, my dear. Monaco, yachts, it sounds adequate," he said, his voice flat. Just then, a commotion arose from the corner of the dining room where a grand piano stood. The elderly pianist, a fixture at Serafina for over a decade, was clutching his chest, his face pale. Staff rushed to his side, helping him gently from the bench. The manager, a man named Antoine with a perpetually worried expression, approached the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his French accent thick with concern, "it seems our beloved maestro, Mr. Dubois, has taken ill. He will be unable to continue his performance this evening. We sincerely apologize." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the diners. The piano was the soul of Serafina. Tiffany sighed dramatically. "Well, there goes the ambiance. How utterly dreary. You'd think for the prices they charge, they'd have a backup pianist." She gestured dismissively towards a young waitress who was quietly clearing a nearby table. "Perhaps one of the serving staff can plink out a tune for us." The waitress, Amelia, flinched almost imperceptibly at the comment. She had been working a double shift, her feet aching, her mind preoccupied with the overdue medical bills for her late mother's care that still haunted her credit. She had learned to be invisible in this world of suffocating wealth, a ghost who refilled water glasses and cleared plates. But Julian, however, saw her flinch, and in his profound boredom, a cruel, impulsive idea sparked. He stood up, his tall frame commanding the attention of the entire room. His gaze landed on Amelia, pinning her in place. "I have a proposition," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent restaurant. All eyes turned to him. Amelia froze, her tray of empty glasses suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Julian's lips curved into a smirk, the one the business world had learned to fear. "I will bet anyone in this room that our charming waitress here," he pointed directly at Amelia, "cannot play a single competent piece on that piano." The room was utterly still. Amelia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. This was a game to him, a way to alleviate his boredom at her expense. "In fact," Julian continued, his voice dripping with arrogance, "I'll make an outrageous wager, a truly life-changing one." He looked directly at Amelia, his steel-gray eyes cold and calculating. "If you, the waitress, can play any classical piece with the skill of a trained musician, I'll marry you." Gasps echoed through the room. Tiffany stared at him, her mouth agape. "Julian, you can't be serious." "Deadly serious," he replied, his eyes never leaving Amelia's. The cruelty of the bet was staggering. It wasn't a real offer. It was a public shaming. When she inevitably failed, she would be a laughingstock. "Of course," Julian added, "when you fail, you'll be fired, immediately. And I'll personally see to you never work in a fine dining establishment in this city again." The threat was real. Julian Vance had the power to blacklist her from her entire livelihood with a single phone call. This was not a bet. It was a display of power. Amelia stood perfectly still for a long moment. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to apologize, to simply melt back into the invisibility she had cultivated for so long. But then she thought of her mother. She thought of the sacrifices, the medical bills, the dream she had been forced to give up. A different kind of fire began to burn away the shame. It was pride. She set her tray down with a soft, deliberate click. She looked at Julian Vance, not as a waitress to a billionaire, but as an equal. "And if I win," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying a strength that surprised everyone, including herself, "you will honor your word then. You will actually marry me." Julian seemed momentarily taken aback by her composure. He said, "I am a man of my word in business. I see no reason why this should be any different." "Then you have a deal, Mr. Vance," Amelia said. She walked toward the grand piano, each step measured and confident. Whispers followed her. Phones were already out recording what everyone assumed would be a spectacular failure. She ignored them. She sat at the polished bench, the cool ivory of the keys feeling like a homecoming. For 2 years, she hadn't touched a piano. Not since she had dropped out of Juilliard to care for her dying mother. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers hover over the keys. The memory came to her, unbidden and painfully clear. A hospital waiting room, the sterile smell, the quiet hum of machinery, and a woman with kind, sad eyes humming a melody while she waited for news about her husband. That woman had been Clara Vance, Julian's wife. She hadn't known it then. They were just two strangers finding a moment of connection in shared grief. Amelia's fingers finally descended. The opening notes of the song filled the restaurant. It was a melody no one had ever heard before. It was hauntingly beautiful, a piece filled with love, sorrow, and a quiet, resilient hope. It was complex, weaving through minor keys and unexpected resolutions, requiring a level of technical skill that spoke of years of dedicated practice. Julian Vance froze. His wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. The blood drained from his face. Around the restaurant, the initial shock at her skill was slowly being replaced by awe at the beauty of the music. But Julian wasn't hearing just beautiful music. He was hearing his own soul. He was hearing Clara's Nocturne. It was a piece he had composed himself, for his wife, during the last months of her illness. It was their secret, a musical language of their love and their impending loss. It had never been written down. It had never been recorded. He had only ever played it for one person, his Clara.
As Amelia's fingers danced across the keys, playing the piece not just correctly, but perfectly, with all the emotion and nuance he had poured into it, Julian's carefully constructed world shattered. The final, soft chord hung in the air, a whisper of love and loss. For a long, breathless moment, the entire restaurant was silent. Then applause erupted. It was not polite clapping. It was a thunderous, heartfelt ovation. Diners were on their feet. Several people were openly weeping. But Julian didn't move. He sat at his table, tears streaming down his face, completely undone. Amelia stood up from the piano bench, her hands trembling now from adrenaline and emotion. She looked directly at him, across the room of stunned onlookers, and with a quiet dignity that defied her station, she spoke. "I believe you owe me a wedding, Mr. Vance." The applause died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence as every eye in the restaurant shifted between the crying billionaire and the composed waitress. Julian Vance, a man who had built an empire by never showing weakness, looked utterly broken. He stared at Amelia, not with anger or confusion, but with a raw, searching vulnerability that no one had ever seen from him. Tiffany finally found her voice. "Julian, this is absurd. It's some kind of trick. She must have found the music somewhere." "Impossible," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. He stood up slowly, his movements stiff, as if he were moving through water. He walked toward Amelia, his gaze never leaving her face. The crowd parted for him like he was a king, though at this moment he looked more like a man walking to his own execution. When he reached the piano, he stopped in front of her. "Where," he began, his voice cracking, "where did you hear that music?" Amelia met his gaze without flinching. "From a woman I met 2 years ago. We were in a hospital waiting room. My mother was in surgery. Her husband," she said, "was in a coma after a car accident. We talked for hours. About music, about loss." The recognition in Julian's eyes was painful to watch. "Clara," he breathed. "She was humming it," Amelia continued softly. "She said her husband had written it for her, a song just for them. She played it for me in the air, with her fingers, describing every note. She said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard." Julian reached out a trembling hand, not to touch Amelia, but to touch the piano keys, as if to confirm they were real. "She never told me she shared it. She said music was meant to be shared, especially when it came from the heart, she told me. That even though she was losing him, the song would keep a part of him with her forever. I never forgot it." The sheer impossible coincidence of it all hung between them. Of all the waitresses in all the restaurants, it was her. The one person on earth besides him who knew Clara's song. "You have to understand," Julian said, his voice pleading, as if he was the one on trial. "The bet. It was a stupid, arrogant joke. I never imagined—" "You are a man of your word, Mr. Vance," Amelia interrupted, her voice gaining a steely edge. "You made a public wager. The terms were clear. You can't seriously expect me to marry you. We're strangers." "We were strangers," she corrected. "Now we are two people connected by a memory and a promise. You made the promise in front of all these witnesses. Are you a man who honors his commitments, or are you just another rich man who believes rules are for other people?" The challenge was clear. His reputation, the very foundation of his business empire, was built on the premise that his word was his bond. A deal was a deal. He had made a public offer, and she had met the terms. To back out now would be to show weakness, to prove himself a liar in front of Manhattan's elite. He looked around at the watching faces, the recording phones, the social media posts already being uploaded. He was trapped by his own hubris. He turned back to Amelia, and for the first time he truly saw her, not as a waitress, but as a woman of incredible strength and hidden depths, a woman who had a connection to his late wife, a connection he couldn't begin to comprehend. "Fine," Julian said, his jaw tight. "A deal is a deal, but we will do this on my terms." Amelia's chin lifted slightly. "What terms?" "A 6-month contractual engagement," he declared, his business mind kicking back into gear, searching for a way to control this spiraling disaster. You will move into my penthouse. You will act the part of my fiancé in public. You will learn what it means to be part of my world." "And at the end of 6 months?" Amelia asked. "If at the end of 6 months you still wish to go through with this insanity, we will have a wedding. But if you break the contract, if you decide this life isn't for you, you walk away with nothing, and you sign a non-disclosure agreement so absolute it will make your head spin." It was an escape clause, a way for him to test her, to find her breaking point, to prove that she was just a gold digger who would eventually buckle under the pressure. Amelia considered his offer for a moment. 6 months in his world. It was a prison sentence and an opportunity all at once. It was a chance to escape her crushing debt, to finally breathe, but it was also a dangerous game. "I'm not a gold digger, Mr. Vance," she said quietly. "I'm a woman who believes in keeping promises. I expect the same from you." "We'll see," he said coolly. Then, turning to the stunned audience, he announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears I'm engaged." The penthouse was a palace of glass and steel, perched atop the city, with views that stretched to the edge of the world. For Amelia, it felt like a gilded cage. For the first 3 weeks of their engagement, Julian treated her with a polite, professional distance. He was honoring his word, but he was making it clear that this was a business arrangement. He bought her a new wardrobe, filled with designer clothes she felt ridiculous in. He hired tutors to teach her etiquette, art history, and the complex genealogies of New York's high society. He was molding her into the perfect fiancée, a beautiful, polished accessory for his arm. She played her part. She attended charity galas, smiled for the cameras, and made small talk with people whose shoes cost more than her yearly income. She did it all with a quiet grace that surprised Julian. He had expected her to be overwhelmed, to make mistakes, to reveal herself as the imposter he believed her to be. But she wasn't. She was a natural, navigating his world with an ease that unnerved him. "You're learning quickly," he commented one evening as they returned from a tedious opera benefit. "I had a good education," she replied, slipping off the diamond earrings he had insisted she wear. "You told me you dropped out of community college," he said, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I lied," she said simply. "I thought it was what you expected to hear from a waitress."
"What's the truth, then?" he asked, following her into the vast living room. "The truth is that I was a scholarship student at Juilliard, studying classical piano performance," she said, her back to him. Julian stopped. Juilliard. That explained her skill, her poise, her deep understanding of music. "Why did you leave?" "My mother got sick. Ovarian cancer. The treatments were expensive, and she didn't have insurance. I dropped out to work full-time to pay her bills." She finally turned to face him, and he saw the grief she kept so carefully hidden. "She died 6 months ago, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a dream I couldn't afford anymore." The confession hit Julian harder than he expected. He saw not a manipulative gold digger, but a woman who had sacrificed everything for her family. It was a level of devotion he had never personally known. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words were genuine. "Don't be," she replied, her walls going back up. "It's my story, not yours. We have a contract, Mr. Vance. Let's stick to it." Their fragile truce was shattered a week later by the arrival of Julian's grandmother, Matilda Vance. She was the matriarch of the family, a formidable woman who controlled the family trust and Julian's future inheritance. She had requested a meeting with Julian's new, mysterious fiancé, and her approval was crucial. Matilda was cold and dismissive toward Amelia, her questions sharp, her gaze judgmental. "Oh, waitress," she said, the word dripping with disdain. "Julian, have you lost your mind? The Vance family does not marry into the service industry." "Amelia is a remarkable woman, grandmother," Julian said, defending her with a conviction that surprised even himself. "She is an opportunist," Matilda shot back. "I've had her investigated. Juilliard dropout, drowning in debt. It's obvious what she's after." Amelia, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "With all due respect, Mrs. Vance, you know nothing about me." "I know your type," Matilda sneered. "No," Amelia said, her voice quiet but firm. "You know my circumstances. There's a difference." She stood up, her dignity a shield against the older woman's venom. "Julian, I believe your grandmother and I are finished." She walked out of the room, leaving Julian alone with her furious grandmother. "You will end this farce," Matilda commanded, "or I will cut you off from the family trust. The hospital wing you want to fund in Clara's name? Consider it gone." Julian found Amelia on the terrace, staring out at the city lights. "She's threatening to pull the funding for Clara's hospital wing," he said, his voice tight. "Then you should end the engagement," Amelia said, without turning around. "It's what you wanted anyway, isn't it? An escape clause." "Is that what you think this is?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. "Money?" "Isn't it always?" she replied, a bitter edge to her voice. "No," he said, his voice softer now. "It's about a promise, and it's about a song." He looked at her, and for the first time the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced with something raw and honest. "Since Clara died, I haven't felt anything, Amelia. Not joy, not sadness, just nothing. But when you played that song for a moment, I felt her. I felt everything." He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm. "I made that bet to humiliate you, to entertain myself. It was a cruel, unforgivable thing to do, but it also brought you into my life, the one person who shares a connection to my wife that I can't explain." Amelia finally turned to look at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I don't want to be a ghost of your wife, Julian." "You're not," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the first person who has made me feel alive since she's been gone." The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything. This was no longer just a contract. It was something real, something terrifying and beautiful. The next day, Julian walked into his grandmother's study. "The engagement stands," he said, his voice firm. Matilda stared at him, her expression like granite. "You would defy me for her?" "I would honor my word," he said, "and I would honor the woman who has shown me more integrity and grace in 1 month than I've seen in a lifetime." "You will regret this," she warned. "No, grandmother," Julian said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "For the first time in 2 years, I have a feeling I won't." The media frenzy was immediate and brutal. "Billionaire Vance to wed waitress after bizarre bet," the headlines screamed. Paparazzi followed their every move. Anonymous sources, likely supplied by Julian's grandmother, leaked details of Amelia's debt and her Juilliard departure, painting her as a cunning social climber. Amelia bore it all with a quiet strength that amazed Julian. She never complained, never broke down. Instead, she focused on her role, attending charity board meetings where her sharp intellect, honed by years of disciplined study, began to shine through. She offered insights on arts funding that impressed even the most jaded board members. But the pressure was taking its toll. Julian saw the shadows under her eyes,
the way she sometimes stared into space, the ghost of her old life haunting her. The breaking point came at a gallery opening. A rival of Julian's, a man named Marcus Thorne, who had lost a major deal to him months earlier, saw his opportunity for revenge. "Well, well, Julian," Torrin said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I see you've acquired a new asset. What's the going rate for a Juilliard dropout these days?" Julian's hand clenched into a fist, but before he could respond, Amelia stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I believe the last time you tried to evaluate an asset, you lost your investors over $100 million. Perhaps you should stick to topics you understand, like, well, I'm sure there's something." The crowd around them stifled laughter. Thorne's face turned a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to retort, but Amelia was already turning away, taking Julian's arm. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with the practiced charm of the high society she supposedly didn't belong to, "I believe they're serving the vintage champagne you love." In the car on the way home, Julian was silent for a long time. Finally, he turned to her. "Thank you," he said, quietly. "For what? Defending your honor?" she teased, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was about to punch him." "I know," she said, "but violence is messy. Humiliation is so much more effective." He looked at her, at this woman who was so much more than he had ever imagined. The contractual engagement had become a real partnership. The fake fiancé had become a genuine friend. And somewhere along the way, without him even realizing it, she had become the most important person in his life.
"Amelia," he began, but he didn't know what to say. That the thought of their 6-month contract ending filled him with a dread he couldn't name? That he was falling in love with her? Just then, his phone rang. It was the director of the new Clara Vance Memorial Hospital wing. "Mr. Vance," the man said, his voice urgent, "there's been a development. Your grandmother has formally withdrawn all funding for the project, effective immediately." The line went dead, and Julian was left with the sickening realization that his grandmother had finally made her move. She was going to destroy the one thing he had left of Clara, the project that was supposed to be his tribute to her memory, and she was using Amelia as the weapon to do it. He looked at Amelia, who was watching him with concern. "What is it, Julian?" "It's my grandmother," he said, his voice grim. "The war has begun." Julian spent the next week in a fury of activity, calling investors, liquidating personal assets, trying to salvage the funding for the hospital wing. But his grandmother's influence was too deep. One by one, doors closed. The project, his legacy for Clara, was collapsing. Throughout it all, Amelia was a quiet, steady presence. She made sure he ate. She listened to him as he vented his frustrations. And one night, when he came home defeated and exhausted, she was sitting at the grand piano in the living room. She began to play. It wasn't Clara's song. It was a Chopin nocturne, a piece full of turmoil and sorrow, but with an underlying thread of hope. The music filled the vast apartment, soothing the sharp edges of his anger and despair. When she finished, he was standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "How do you always know what I need?" he whispered. "Because I know what it feels like to lose something you love," she said, her voice soft. "I'm going to lose it, Amelia. The hospital wing. It was the only thing I was doing that felt meaningful." "No, it wasn't," she said, turning to face him. "You honor Clara every day, by the way you talk about her, by the music you wrote for her. A building is just a building, Julian. Her memory lives in you." "But it's not enough," he said, his voice breaking. "I failed her. I failed to protect her memory from my family's petty games."
Then build something new, Amelia urged, her eyes shining with a fierce intensity. Something they can't touch. Something that comes from you. What are you talking about? The Vance Foundation for the Arts, she said, her voice gaining excitement. Use your money to fund scholarships like kids like me, kids with talent but no resources. Build a legacy of creation, not just a monument of stone. Let Clara's memory be about giving future artists a chance, the chance I lost. He stared at her, stunned by the brilliance, the simple, perfect rightness of her idea. In that moment, he saw it all clearly. The foundation, the scholarships, the lives they could change. A legacy of hope born from his love for two different, extraordinary women. Amelia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Don't, she interrupted, placing a finger on his lips. Just do it. Be the man I know you are. The next morning, Julian called a press conference. He announced the withdrawal of funding for the hospital wing, and before the reporters could even start scribbling, he announced the formation of the Vance Foundation for the Arts with an initial endowment of $500 million. He named Amelia Hayes as the executive director. The news was a bombshell. His grandmother was furious, but her power play had backfired. Julian had turned her weapon against her, creating something she couldn't control or destroy. That evening, Julian found Amelia on the terrace again. Their 6-month contract was due to end in 1 week. You know, she said, a small smile playing on her lips, executive director. It has a nice ring to it, much better than waitress. It suits you, he said, moving to stand beside her. The air between them was different now. The pretense was gone, leaving only a raw, terrifying honesty. The contract is almost over, she said quietly. I know. You'll have your freedom back. You can finally be free of the ridiculous bet you made. I don't want to be free of it. Amelia, the past 6 months, they haven't been a contract. They've been my life. The best part of my life in a very long time. He took her hands in his. The bet was the stupidest, most arrogant thing I've ever done, but it led me to you, and I don't know what I'd do without you. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. Julian. I love you, Amelia Hayes, he said, the words simple and true. Not because you know Clara's song, not because you're my fiancée by contract. I love you for who you are, your strength, your kindness, your brilliant mind, your beautiful heart. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't a flashy diamond, but a simple, elegant sapphire ring. Clara's was a diamond. I wanted yours to be something different, something uniquely you. He opened the box. The bet is over. The contract is void. This is not about a promise I was forced to make. This is about a choice I am desperate to make. Amelia Hayes, will you marry me? For real this time. Amelia was crying and laughing at the same time. You are really a fool, Julian Vance. Is that a yes? He asked, his heart in his eyes. Yes, she whispered, launching herself into his arms. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it was a perfect fit. They stood on the terrace, high above the city, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their pasts. A year later, the first recipients of the Vance Foundation for the Arts Scholarship were announced at a ceremony held at Juilliard. Amelia, now Amelia Vance, stood at the podium, her husband looking on from the front row with a proud, loving smile. She was pregnant with their first child. She spoke of second chances, of the power of art to heal, and of the importance of believing in dreams, even when the world tells you to give up. Later that evening, they sat at home at their piano. Julian's fingers found the familiar notes of Clara's nocturne. He played it through once, a quiet tribute to the woman who had unknowingly brought them together. Then Amelia placed her hands on the keys beside him. Together, they began to play a new song. It was a melody that was uniquely theirs, a song of new love, of healing, and of a future filled with a different, beautiful kind of music.